It's time to take a look at your morning papers. And of course, I'm joined in studio this morning by eNCA journalist Gcina Mvana, as well as comedian Teboho Theoha. Before we chat, I'm going to run through some of the headlines on the morning papers. And we start with the Sunday Times leading with exposed Supra's gift to Zuma. Of course, that's the story on cattle intended for Northwest's poor farmers end up in Nkandla kraal. If you'd like to get the latest on that, you can pick up your copy of the Sunday Times. Also leading with a picture of a policeman which really captures scenes that we have been seeing throughout the week last week. A riot policeman fires rubber bullets to prevent looting in the Northwest capital of Mahikeng on Friday as protests against government corruption and poor service delivery continued for a second day. Let's take a look at the City Press and what it is leading with this morning. Supra stands defiant. There would be mayhem in Mahikeng had Supra been fired. Innocent people were going to die, so Cyril did well. That's a quote by someone who is saying that perhaps the ANC is taking the right stance by going through all the many processes and consultations before heeding to residents' calls to remove Supra Mahumapelo from the Northwest. Another story that came to light on Friday and that's been trending on social media is the alleged, is it marriage?
Marriage.
Alleged marriage. Is it confirmed now? Serere marriage, okay. Former President Jacob Zuma's alleged marriage to a 24-year-old. We'll touch on that briefly. Right. Let's get the conversation started. Thank you very much, guys, for joining us.
Thank you for having us, dude.
It may not have made the papers this morning, but we saw last night the game between Kaizer Chiefs
and Free State
Stars,
right,
in Moses Mabhida Stadium yesterday.
Yes.
I just want to get your initial thoughts. I'll start with you, Teboho.
I think, football hooliganism has been a problem globally for quite a while, more so here. We know that we've had incidences at Ellis Park where there have been riots and people have lost their lives. And I think we cannot use the excuse that Kaizer Chiefs has been playing terribly for an extended period of time and they emotionally abuse their supporters and Steve Komphela should have left ages ago. Those can't be the excuses that we use. Why should he have left? I don't think we have enough time on the show for
Steve is not on the ground playing.
I think we can see who's the case.
At which point do we hold players accountable for losses?
It's like, I think it's like when you have students and a teacher, right? If the students underperform, who are we going to place the blame on?
The teacher.
The teacher, exactly. Case closed. Okay.
Okay, there we go. Right. On the resignation of Steve Komphela, though, some people drawing parallels and saying that this is how you show leadership. What is happening in the Northwest, no one is actually taking responsibility. Fans went onto the stadium, onto the pitch, and the coach resigned. And there you have people who are on the streets who are complaining about basic services not being met and expressing their anger and frustration in different ways. Are they right? We don't know.
I think you're correct to draw parallels between what happened at Moses Mabhida and what's happening in the Northwest. Because again, we say that Steve Komphela showed great leadership by stepping down. But just like in the Northwest, why does it take a riot and people setting the streets on fire for us to be able to say that, look, the leadership is actually not performing the function that it is supposed to? And this Northwest thing has been going on since 2014. They've been, if you've been following the news cycle there have been protests almost regularly. It's like they're scheduled. It's, so to say that Steve did well to step down, I can accept that, but the situation in the Northwest has come to a point where I feel like it is too late. It's gone past the stepping down. It's come to the point where someone must be held liable, someone must be prosecuted for this.
On that point though, I mean, there's been a lot of praise for President Cyril Ramaphosa from coming back from London to come and deal with this situation. However, not everyone believes that, that was such a great thing. It's like, of course the country is burning, you must come back and address the issues. Outside of all of that politics, how has, according to your observation, the ANC handled the situation there?
The situation in the Northwest. It's very difficult because at the end of the day, the ANC has to show us, the viewers, the voters rather, a united front. So they cannot be showing us, even though maybe they can see that someone within the organization is in the wrong, they can't be exposing it to us. But I find it very I find it very confusing because recently ANC Secretary General Jesse Durant, apparently ANC members in the Northwest refused a motion of no confidence against the Premier. And it's not the first time that there have been complaints about Premier Supra Mahumapelo. But in the long run, I keep questioning myself, is there no other way that us as South Africans can show our dissatisfaction over things instead of looting, instead of destroying things, instead of things that we've seen at Moses Mabhida with the unhappiness? Like, I think there's a trend. Maybe do we feel that violence is the only language that is, clear? Is it the clearest signal, rather, that we can show our happiness or dismay about certain things?
It's a pertinent question, but also we've seen similar scenes during the week in Khayelitsha of people who are also protesting for service delivery. When you hear what Gcina is saying in terms of how we express discontent and unhappiness, can you, to a certain extent, blame people when healthcare systems do not work, when you do not have the most basic? It's okay to sit in your position of privilege and say, you shouldn't be doing it this way, you shouldn't be doing that. And these are pertinent questions that we need to ask, but is it fair to expect someone who can't even access a nurse or medication? How patient can people be?
I don't think it's fair at all. I mean, in the city press, I think it is, in one of the opinion pieces that they've got, one of the journalists, Kolani Koma, says, stop being the victim. And he writes this whole article about how Africans need to stop being victims and stop blaming others for the misfortune that you're having in your lives. And I think we're trying very much to police how people express their indignation or their rage. You had the miniskirt protests that were happening in Bree at some point, where Ridi Kabi was leading a protest and women were scampily dressed, and she was saying that even if we're dressed like this, we cannot be victims of sexual assault. And a lot of people were saying, yeah, you can protest, but just not that way.
Yeah.
And I think to tell a victim at any point to say, look, you can be angry, but I find your way of expressing not that angry.
But I'm going to remind you of a story that our colleague in Port Elizabeth, Sandy McCowan, did a few days ago about a father who threw his child off the roof from a shack. That was a form of protest, according to him, because someone, you can look at this, you can argue this in different ways. As a parent, what if something happens to my child? How could you take your child and use them as some sort of shield to get whatever it is that you are fighting for? But on the other hand, a colleague of mine said to me, but how would you feel, because this shack is the only home that this person has? If I lose the shack, where am I and my child going to live? Which shelter? We haven't been told where we're going to go. This is the only form, just throwing this child. But at the same time, as a parent, it's scary, and we will look at it and we will criticize, from a parental point of view. But on the other hand, from a protester's point of view, a person who doesn't have basic needs like the rest of us are privileged to have, what do you do when you're in that point? When you're losing the only home that you have, what do you do exactly? I'm not condoning the father's actions, quite properly.
To be able to say, but those guys are so mad. What y'all mad about, though? It's easy for us to say.
Because we're not in this situation. We don't understand. Exactly.
We're not in this situation.